the $400 billion man. Sounds like a superhero movie, right? But what we're going to talk about today is the true story behind that number. And it's one of the most incredible and, well, intentionally buried stories in all of world history.
So let me ask you something. Could one single traveler, just one guy, accidentally crash an entire economy just by being too generous? Sounds kind of nuts, right? A wild hypothetical. But what if I told you it actually happened? One man, one journey, and so much gold that his generosity literally triggered a decade-long economic crisis in one of the world's most powerful cities.
Yeah, $400 billion. That's the estimated net worth, in today's money, of a man named Mansa Musa. He was the 14th century ruler of the Mali Empire in Africa. And by pretty much every measure, he was the richest human being who has ever lived. Period.
Okay, so let's get into it. And our story actually begins with the aftermath. We're talking total economic chaos in medieval Cairo, which, by the way, was one of the wealthiest cities on the entire planet at the time. We're gonna unpack exactly how a single act of charity, or maybe over-charity, brought a regional superpower to its knees.
But hang on, before we get to the crash itself, we gotta ask, who was this guy? You know, to really get the impact of what he did, you have to understand the empire that created this, just staggering wealth. And let me tell you, this context, it changes everything.
Okay, now look at this, because this right here, this is fascinating. It just completely shatters the version of history a lot of us probably learned in school. We're talking about the 1300s. While Europe was, this messy, fragmented collection of little feudal states, the Mali Empire, it was a vast, centralized power. It was bigger than all of Western Europe combined, with a sophisticated bureaucracy and a level of wealth that European kings could literally only dream about.
So here's the key thing to get. This was not just some remote, isolated kingdom. No way. The Mali Empire was a global economic player. It controlled the source of a huge amount of the gold that ended up in European and Middle Eastern coins. I mean, its influence was felt across 3 continents. This was a big deal.
And this just shows you the sheer scale of that power. Get this, in 1324, when Mansa Musa decides to go on his pilgrimage to Mecca, look at who he brings with him. 60,000 people. That's the size of a small city today. And he's got 80 camels, and each one is carrying hundreds of pounds of pure gold. This wasn't a trip. This was a moving city of wealth, just snaking for miles across the Sahara Desert. Can you even imagine?
All right, so that brings us back to Cairo. Just picture it. This golden city on the move arrives at the gates of what was, at the time, the wealthiest city in the entire Islamic world. And what happened next? Well, it was so incredible that scholars were writing about it for decades.
So check out this quote from an actual eyewitness, a scholar named Al-Umari. He said, Musa just spread a flood of his generosity on Cairo. And he wasn't kidding. Musa gave gold to everyone. He's handing it out to poor people on the street. He's showering officials with gifts. He's paying for new mosques. He was operating on a scale of wealth that the world, even in a super rich city like Cairo, had just never, ever seen before.
And here's what happens next. It's basic economics, right? By literally flooding the market with gold, he completely broke the laws of supply and demand. The value of gold just tanks. It drops by about 25%. So all of a sudden, the money in everyone's pockets was worth a quarter less than it was just a few weeks earlier. Poof, gone.
And look at this timeline. This wasn't just a short-term shock. Oh no, it triggered massive inflation that destabilized Egypt's entire economy for 12 years. A full dozen years of financial chaos, all because one guy was maybe a little too generous on his vacation. But here's what's maybe the most amazing part of this whole story. Mansa Musa realized what he'd done, and he tried to fix it. On his way back home, he borrowed back all the gold he could from merchants in Cairo at super high interest rates. And what does that do? It pulls gold out of the market to try and stabilize the value. The guy understood monetary policy. He was basically attempting a 14th century version of what we now call quantitative tightening. That's incredible.
So you gotta be asking yourself, right? If this story is so nuts, a king richer than anyone ever, an empire bigger than Western Europe, an economic crash that's all documented, then why don't we all know this story? Why isn't this common knowledge? Well, that brings us to a much, much darker part of the story.
Here's the thing. The entire justification for European colonialism in Africa, it was built on a lie, a massive lie.
The idea of a dark continent, a place with no history, no civilization, just waiting to be saved. The story of Mansa Musa doesn't just challenge that narrative, it single-handedly demolishes it. And this timeline kind of connects the dots for us.
You see, tales of Mansa Musa's incredible wealth are what drove Portuguese explorers down the coast of West Africa in the 1400s. They weren't discovering anything. They knew something was there. They were looking for the source of all that gold. And that initial search for resources, well, it slowly and then very rapidly turned into the transatlantic slave trade. So by the time they're carving up the whole continent in the 1880s, that lie about a dark continent, it wasn't just a story anymore. It was essential. And that is why this story had to be erased. Think about it. You just can't justify colonizing and enslaving a people after you've acknowledged that they built universities that attracted scholars from all over the world. You can't claim you're on a civilizing mission when their king literally had so much money he broke another country's economy by accident. So the erasure, it wasn't an accident. It was a prerequisite for the whole colonial project. So why does this story matter now? Why are we talking about it? Because, understanding this history, it means we have to confront some really uncomfortable truths, not just about the past, but about our present too.
Now, let's be super clear about something. This is not about sanitizing history or creating a perfect hero. The Mali Empire, just like pretty much every other empire of its time, including in Europe, participated in systems of exploitation. Its incredible wealth was built in part on the backs of enslaved labor in the gold and salt mines. His caravan included 12,000 enslaved attendants. We have to be able to hold both of these truths in our hands at the same time. Immense, incredible achievement, and deep, undeniable injustice.
But this is where it gets really interesting, because it shows the bias in how we remember history. We celebrate Thomas Jefferson as a founding father. He wrote that all men are created equal, right? We tend to treat his ownership of over 600 human beings as a complicated footnote. But Mansa Musa, who was operating within very similar systems of his era, is almost completely erased from the history books. Who gets to be remembered and who gets forgotten? Well, that's not an accident, is it?
And this, really, is the ultimate takeaway. The history of Africa is not just a story of victimhood. It's a story of empires, of scholars, of incredible wealth, of power, of amazing achievement, and yeah, of failure too. It's a story of human complexity on a truly grand scale that was deliberately, intentionally wiped from the record.
And so that leaves us with one last question to think about. If a figure as monumental, as unbelievably wealthy and powerful as Mansa Musa could be so thoroughly buried from our collective memory, it really forces us to ask, doesn't it? Whose stories, whose achievements, and whose histories are still being erased right now from the world we think we know?